My name is Gabriel Fisher, and I once believed my life had a certain symmetry, a harmony carved out by the sharp edges of discipline and unwavering obedience. Raised in the Amish community of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, my world revolved around simplicity, plain clothes, the hum of horse hooves on dirt roads, and prayers offered in the soft glow of candlelight. This life was my fortress, my sanctuary, and my cage. It was all I had ever known. The rules were clear, unyielding. They offered comfort, or so I thought. At the heart of our way of life was obedience. No electricity, no automobiles, no distractions. We lived, worked, and worshipped as our ancestors had. It was meant to be sacred, a direct path to God. I followed every rule, believed in every sermon, and carried out every task with precision. Yet there was a growing unease within me. In moments of quiet, when the world was still, my prayers felt hollow. Were they reaching heaven, or were they merely echoes trapped within my own mind? I had been taught that doubt was dangerous, a temptation whispered by the devil himself. So I silenced those thoughts, locked them away, and turned to the scriptures and the ordinances to reassure myself. But the ache remained, a question unanswered. Was I enough? Did my obedience truly please God, or was I merely playing a role, performing for an audience I couldn't see? The morning it happened was bitterly cold. I gripped the reins tightly as my buggy swayed with the movements of the horse. Snow stretched out across the farmland in a pristine white blanket, the sun barely cutting through the gray sky. It was peaceful, or at least I told myself it was. As I rounded the blind curve near the edge of town, my world shattered. The truck appeared out of nowhere, speeding and unrelenting. I didn't have time to cry out, no time to think. The impact was immediate. The wood splintered, the buggy overturned, and the sound of metal crushing against metal drowned everything else. Then silence. I expected pain, the agony of broken bones or torn flesh. Instead, there was nothing. Just blackness, deep, suffocating blackness. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't lying on the road and I wasn't in the buggy. I was somewhere else. The darkness around me wasn't mere absence of light. It pressed against me, heavy and cold, as though it had substance. The air was thick with dread, and I felt as though I were drowning. There was no ground beneath me, no sense of up or down, no direction, just endless void. My voice trembled as I called out, but the words were swallowed by the emptiness. Fear gripped me, sharp, merciless. Scenes began to unfold around me like fragments of dreams or memories. Yet they weren't memories. They were moments from my life, playing out as if I were a spectator watching someone else's story. I saw myself working the fields, kneeling in prayer during worship, tending to chores with quiet diligence. To the outside world it would have seemed perfect, a life of faith and purpose. But the vision shifted. The moments I had buried deep within me surfaced. Times I questioned if the rules were enough, if God truly saw me, if I had done enough to earn his love. And then something else appeared, something far worse. I saw the ripple effects of my choices. The pride I carried in my adherence to the ordinances had made me judgmental, blind to the struggles of those around me. I saw faces of people I had hurt, friends, family, members of my community, who had needed compassion but received coldness from me instead. The weight of regret crushed me, relentless and unforgiving. The darkness seemed to feed on my guilt, growing thicker, heavier, suffocating. For the first time I realized the truth of my life. My obedience had been hollow, a performance. My faith had been shallow, focused on appearances rather than genuine connection with God. I fell to my knees in the void, trembling and broken. My voice cracked as I cried out, "Jesus, if you are real, help me, don't leave me here." At first there was nothing, only the heavy silence and the choking darkness. But then, faintly, a light appeared in the distance, small at first, fragile, like the flicker of a candle. It grew steadily, brighter and warmer, pushing the darkness back. As it approached, I felt hope begin to rise within me, a fragile hope, but hope nonetheless. The light surrounded me, its warmth washing over me and lifting the suffocating weight from my soul. I could breathe again. And then I saw him. Jesus stood before me, radiant, his presence overwhelming yet comforting. His gaze met mine, and I felt as though he could see every corner of my soul, the doubts, the pride, the brokenness. Yet there was no condemnation in his eyes, only love, pure and unyielding. The light began to fade, and once again I was surrounded by darkness. This time, though, it was not the suffocating void I had experienced before. It was quieter, almost reflective, a mirror to the deepest corners of my soul. As I stood there, the warmth of the encounter with Jesus still lingering in my heart, I realized that I hadn't truly left the place of judgment. This was not the end of my journey, it was merely the beginning. In this abyss, the silence was both deafening and alive. It seemed to pulse with an unseen force, a presence that demanded my attention. The stillness stretched endlessly, yet I felt an odd pull, a sense that I was being drawn deeper, pulled towards something unknown. Every step I took seemed to echo, reverberating back to me like whispers in a cavern. I began to see them again, the scenes of my life. They emerged slowly, fragments of memories glowing faintly in the gloom. But these were not the moments of hard work or devotion. These were the moments I had tried so hard to forget. Times I had spoken harshly, dismissed others' struggles, or turned away when someone needed a kind word. I watched as a young boy from my community approached me, asking for guidance. He had been questioning his faith, torn between the rules of our community and the longing for something deeper. I remembered the way I had responded, cold and dismissive, chastising him for his lack of obedience instead of listening to his heart. Now, as I watched this moment replay, I saw the pain in his eyes, the quiet defeat as he walked away. Next came another memory. A woman in my community, widowed and struggling to provide for her children. She had come to me for help, but I had been too caught up in my own tasks to offer more than a passing word of encouragement. I had believed that my adherence to the ordinances made me righteous, yet now I saw the harm I had caused through my indifference. The darkness around me seemed to thicken, pressing closer with each scene that unfolded. Regret seeped into my bones, heavier than I could bear. "Why are you showing me this?" I whispered, my voice trembling in the void. But there was no answer, only the unrelenting march of memories that I could no longer escape. As I sank deeper into the abyss, the visions began to change. They were no longer confined to my personal failings. They showed me the lives I had touched indirectly, the ripple effects of my choices. I saw the young boy grow older, his questions unresolved, his faith dwindling until he left the community altogether. I saw the widow struggle on her own, her children growing up without the support they desperately needed. The weight of these truths crushed me. It was not simply my own pride and doubts that had failed me. It was the way they had spilled over, affecting those around me. I had been blind to the damage, convinced that my strict adherence to the rules was enough. But now I saw the cost, and it was more than I could bear. I fell to my knees in the darkness, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words barely audible. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to—" My voice broke, the guilt and regret swallowing me whole. I felt as though I were drowning, the weight of my choices dragging me deeper into the void. It was then that I felt it, the faintest flicker of light. It was not the same radiant light I had seen before. This was different. It was smaller, gentler, almost hesitant in its approach. I watched as it grew, illuminating the darkness around me. And then I saw them. They were not memories, but faces. Faces of the people I had hurt, the young boy, the widow, others I couldn't recognize but knew I had wronged. They were standing in the light, their expressions filled with something I couldn't understand. It wasn't anger or condemnation, it was forgiveness. I wanted to speak, to tell them I was sorry, to beg for their understanding, but my words caught in my throat. Instead, I watched as they smiled, gentle, quiet smiles that spoke of a peace I couldn't fathom. The light surrounded them, and in it I saw the love of Jesus reflect, a love that wasn't bound by the rules or my failures, but a love that transcended everything. The light grew brighter, enveloping the faces until they disappeared. In their place stood Jesus once more, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Gabriel," he said, his voice soft but firm, "do you see now? Your worth is not in your works, but in my grace. And just as you are forgiven, you must forgive yourself." I shook my head, the tears streaming faster. "I don't know how," I admitted, my voice cracking. "I've caused so much harm. How can I forgive myself when I don't deserve it?" "You don't have to deserve it," he replied, kneeling beside me. "Grace is not earned, it is given. Let go of the burden you carry and trust in me. The darkness cannot hold you, not when you walk in my light." I felt his hand rest on my shoulder, its warmth piercing through the cold that had enveloped me. Slowly, I began to rise, the weight of my guilt lifting as I stood. The light grew brighter, spreading until it filled the void entirely. The darkness was gone, replaced by a radiant peace that I had never known. When I returned to consciousness, the warmth and radiance of Jesus' presence stayed with me, lingering in my chest like a steady flame. Yet, as my eyes fluttered open, the harshness of reality pulled me back. The cold pavement, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles, and the panicked voices of paramedics surrounded me. Pain coursed through my body, but it paled in comparison to the newfound clarity burning within my soul. They lifted me onto a stretcher and rushed me into the back of an ambulance. My body, battered and bruised, felt distant, like a shell I inhabited, but no longer entirely belonged to. As they worked to stabilize me, strapping me down, asking rapid-fire questions about my name and the date, I closed my eyes and held on to what I'd experienced. I whispered under my breath, "I won't forget. I won't forget what you've shown me." The days that followed were a blur of white walls, muted voices, and antiseptic smell. I had survived the accident, they said, but the damage had been severe: a concussion, broken ribs, and countless bruises. My family sat vigil by my hospital bed, their plain clothes and solemn faces a reminder of the world I was about to re-enter. Yet, how could I re-enter it unchanged? I had seen too much. I had felt his love, and had been called to something greater than the traditions I had once clung to. When my father finally spoke, his voice was low but filled with emotion. "Gabriel," he said, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the bed, "God has spared you for a reason. He must have plans for you." "Yes," I murmured, though my voice was weak. "He does." But as I looked into his eyes, I saw the unspoken fear behind his words. My father believed in the foundation of the Ordnung, the sacred rules that bound our community together. To him, anything that veered from that path was dangerous, chaotic, and even sinful. How could I tell him that I'd been shown a truth that transcended those rules? How could I explain the freedom I'd encountered in Jesus without shattering the careful world he'd built for himself and our family? For the first time, I felt the weight of the mission Jesus had given me. It was not just the joy of sharing his grace, it was the burden of knowing that what I shared might be rejected, even by those I loved most. As the weeks passed and I began my recovery, I found moments of solitude to reflect and pray. The physical pain ebbed, but the ache in my heart grew stronger. I couldn't ignore the urgency I felt to share what I had been shown. Yet the fear of rejection loomed large. My family visited often, their presence comforting yet complicated. My mother prayed for me quietly, her eyes filled with both gratitude and worry. My younger siblings seemed fascinated by my miraculous survival, yet they didn't know the full story. The first time I tried to speak about it was around the dinner table. Shortly after I returned home from the hospital, the oil lamp cast shadows on the walls as my family shared news of the community and offered prayers of thanks for my recovery. I listened silently, my mind racing with how to begin. Finally, as the plates were cleared and my father leaned back in his chair, I found the courage to speak. "There's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice steady but laced with apprehension. "About the accident, and what happened after." Their eyes turned to me, expectant and curious. My father's expression remained neutral, though I could sense his guarded skepticism. When the truck hit me, I continued, "Everything went black, but I wasn't unconscious. I was somewhere else. A place of darkness, a void so deep it felt like it would consume me. I saw my life, my choices. The good, yes, but also the harm I'd caused by clinging to rules and pride instead of love and grace." My father's brow furrowed, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My mother reached for my hand, her grip firm, as if trying to anchor me. "But then," I said, my voice growing softer, "Jesus came to me. He pulled me out of the darkness and showed me a love unlike anything I'd ever known. He told me that my worth isn't in the rules I follow or the works I perform. It's in Him, in His grace." Silence hung heavy in the room, broken only by the distant creak of the windmill outside. My father's lips pressed into a thin line, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Finally he spoke, his voice measured but tinged with unease. "Gabriel," he said slowly, "you've been through a great trauma. Perhaps your mind conjured these things to comfort you." "No," I said firmly, meeting his gaze. "It wasn't my mind. It was real. More real than anything I've ever known." My words hung between us like a chasm, and I knew he didn't know how to bridge it. Over the next weeks, I began to share my story with others in the community. I chose my words carefully, knowing how deeply ingrained the Ordnung was in their life. For some, my testimony sparked curiosity and even hope. They listened with wide eyes as I described the love and freedom I had experienced. For others, however, my words were met with resistance, even hostility. "You're saying the Ordnung doesn't matter?" one elder asked me during a community meeting, his tone sharp with accusation. "No," I replied. "I'm saying the Ordnung is not the foundation of our faith. Jesus is. The rules can guide us, but they can't save us. Only His grace can do that." My words were met with murmurs of discontent, and I felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. Yet, amidst the resistance, there were moments of light. A young woman named Miriam approached me after one meeting, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I felt it too," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The weight of trying to be perfect and never feeling close to God. What you're saying, it gives me hope." Her words renewed my courage. I began to meet with those who were willing to listen, praying with them, sharing scripture, and helping them see that grace was not something to be earned, but a gift to be received. The challenges I faced were numerous. Disapproving elders, whispered rumors, even the threat of shunning. Yet, I held on to the promise Jesus had given me. "I am with you always." Those words became my anchor, my strength, as I navigated the storm. One night, as I knelt by my bedside in prayer, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't the absence of struggle or fear, but the assurance that I wasn't alone. I realized that the mission Jesus had given me was not about seeking approval or avoiding rejection. It was about obedience to Him, no matter the cost. As I rose from my knees, I knew that my life would never be the same. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but I also knew it was filled with purpose. I was no longer defined by fear, pride, or the need for perfection. I was defined by His love, and that was enough. When I returned home from the hospital, I expected some semblance of comfort, a familiarity to ease the disorientation of the accident and the profound experience that had followed, but instead I felt a deep unease. The home I had known all my life, with its plain wooden furniture, the tick of the clock powered only by winding, and the quiet murmurs of evening prayers, now felt alien to me. Everything about it seemed untouched, unchanging. Yet I was not the same. The first few days were a blur of well-wishers and practicalities. Neighbors stopped by, bringing soups, bread, and condolences. I sat quietly, the smell of fresh rolls mingling with the faint aroma of oil lamps, trying to reconcile what had happened to me with the life I was supposed to return to. My father was steadfast, as he always was. His broad shoulders were stooped slightly from years of working the fields, yet his presence dominated. My mother fluttered around me like a bird, her worry manifesting in the way she brought me too many blankets or refilled my water glass before it was empty. But all of it, the care, the attention, the mundane rhythm of daily life, felt removed, as if I were watching it from afar, detached. I knew something had shifted in me, something monumental yet invisible to the world around me. The nights were the hardest. Alone in my room, the weight of my mission pressed down on me. I would kneel beside my simple wooden bed, the familiar ritual of prayer now taking on a new urgency. "Lord," I whispered, my voice cracking in the stillness, "show me the way. I don't know how to do this." The only response was silence, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the void I had experienced. This silence was warm, filled with the assurance that I was being heard, even if I didn't yet have answers. Sleep. When I closed my eyes, I would see him again, Jesus, standing in the radiant light, his gaze steady, his words echoing in my mind, "Your worth is in me, not the rules you follow." I clung to those words, but they raised more questions than they answered. How could I share this truth with a community that measured faith in strict adherence to the Ordnung? How could I convey the freedom I had found without being seen as a threat to everything they held dear? On the third night I dreamed. At least I thought it was a dream. I was standing in a vast wheat field, the stalks golden and swaying in a gentle breeze. The horizon stretched endlessly, the setting sun bathing the landscape in warm hues of orange and pink. I felt an overwhelming sense of peace, yet there was a tension in the air as if something was about to happen. As I stood there, I saw a figure walking toward me, Jesus. His presence was unmistakable, and my heart raced as he approached. When he spoke, his voice was both gentle and commanding. "Gabriel," he said, "you've been shown the truth. Now it is time to act." "I'm afraid," I admitted, my voice. What if they don't listen? What if I fail?" He smiled, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You're not called to succeed by the world's standards. You're called to be faithful. Speak the truth in love and leave the rest to me." As he spoke, the wheat field began to shift. The golden stalks seemed to transform into people, men, women, children, standing side by side, their faces illuminated by the fading sunlight. Some looked at me with curiosity, others with skepticism, and a few with hostility. But amidst them were those whose eyes glistened with hope. They stepped forward, reaching out, their hands trembling as if desperate for something they couldn't yet name. "These are the ones who will hear you," Jesus said, his voice filled with compassion. "The seeds you plant will grow, even if you don't see the harvest." When I woke, the dream lingered in my mind, vivid and alive. I sat up in bed, the first rays of dawn spilling through the window, and felt a quiet resolve settle over me. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I made my first attempt to share my testimony outside my family. My younger sister, Rebecca, was the only one awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of herbal tea. The flickering light of the oil lamp cast shadows across her delicate features, and I realized how young she still was. Only 16, on the cusp of adulthood but still tethered to the innocence of youth. "Rebecca," I said softly, sitting across from her. She looked up, surprised. I had barely spoken since returning home. "Yes, Gabriel?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you," I began, my hands trembling slightly as I wrapped them around a mug of tea for support. "About the accident. About what happened to me." Her brows furrowed in concern, but she nodded for me to continue. As I recounted my experience, the void, the visions, the overwhelming love of Jesus, her expression shifted from confusion to when I finished, her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "Gabriel," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "do you really believe it was him? That it wasn't just a dream or something your mind created?" "I don't just believe it," I said firmly. "I know it. It was real, more real than anything I've ever experienced. And I know I've been called to share it, to help others see the truth of His grace." Rebecca was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the table. Then she looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. "I felt it too," she admitted, her voice trembling. "The weight of trying to be perfect, of wondering if I'll ever be good enough. What you're saying, it scares me, but it also makes sense. Maybe I need to know Him too." Her words were a balm to my weary soul. In that moment, I realized that the mission Jesus had given me wasn't just about reaching the entire. It was about moments like this, one heart at a time, one life transformed by the truth of His love. Rebecca's quiet acceptance gave me the courage to take the next step. I began reaching out to others in the community, starting with those I sensed might be open to hearing my story. Each conversation was a delicate balance, a dance of vulnerability and caution. For every person who listened with an open heart, there were others who pushed back, their eyes hard with suspicion, their words sharp with judgment. "You're playing a dangerous game, Gabriel," one elder warned me after a particularly tense discussion. "You're sowing confusion, and that's not what our community needs." "I'm not trying to confuse anyone," I replied calmly. "I'm trying to show them that faith is about more than rules. It's about a relationship with Him. That's the truth He's called me to share." The elder shook his head, his expression a mixture of disappointment and frustration. "Be careful, Gabriel. The Ordnung is what holds us together. Without it, there's only chaos." His words lingered long after he left, but they didn't deter me. I had seen the chaos of the void, and I knew the Ordnung couldn't save anyone from it. Only Jesus could do that. By the end of that week, I felt both exhausted and invigorated. The path I had chosen, or rather the path I had been called to, was fraught with challenges, but it was also filled with moments of grace, glimpses of hope in the eyes of those who were beginning to understand. As I knelt in prayer that evening, the image of the wheat field returned to me. I saw the faces once more, the curious, the skeptical, the hostile, and the hopeful. And I remembered Jesus' words, "The seeds you plant will grow, even if you don't see the harvest." I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't turn back. This was my mission, and I would carry it out step by step, trusting that He would guide me. The days that followed were nothing short of a storm. My story, once confined to the walls of my family's home, spread throughout the community like wildfire. I hadn't intended for it to happen so quickly, but it seemed that word of my experience, the accident, the void, the vision of Jesus, was too compelling to remain a secret. It reached the ears of the elders, the pastors, and even those who rarely concern themselves with spiritual matters. For the first time in my life, I found myself at the center of attention in a community that valued humility above all else. It started subtly at first. Friends who would usually stop by to help with chores or share a meal became distant. Neighbors avoided my gaze when we crossed paths on the snow-dusted lanes. Even at Sunday worship, the quiet murmurs that usually accompanied the prelude seemed louder, filled with tension. I could feel the weight of their unspoken questions pressing against me. And then it began. The meetings, the interrogations. It was a cold morning when my father came into the barn, where I was mending a broken fence. His face was stern, and I could tell immediately that he had something serious on his mind. "Gabriel," he began, his voice low but firm, "the elders have called a meeting. They want to hear from you." I paused, the hammer in my hand hanging mid-air. "About what?" "You know what," he replied, his eyes narrowing. "Your story. This experience you've been sharing. They say it's causing confusion, division even. They want to understand where you stand." My heart sank. I had been expecting this, but the reality of it still felt like a punch to the gut. The Ordnung, the set of rules that governed every aspect of our lives, was clear about matters of faith. Testimonies were to align with the teachings of the Church, and anything that deviated from that was seen as dangerous, heretical even. "I'll go," I said simply, setting down the hammer and wiping my hands on my apron. "I have nothing to hide." The meeting was held in the small council room adjacent to the church, a place I had only entered once before, when I was baptized as a teenager. The room was dimly lit, the wooden walls lined with shelves of old hymnals and church records. A long table dominated the space, and around it sat the elders, their faces grave and expectant. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table, my father standing behind me like a sentinel. The air was thick with tension as the eldest among them, Bishop Ziegler, cleared his throat and began to speak. "Gabriel," he said, his voice measured and deliberate, "we've heard troubling things about what you've been saying. Stories of visions, of revelations that seem to contradict the teachings of the Church. Tell us plainly, what is it that you've experienced, and why do you feel the need to share it?" I took a deep breath, the memory of the void and the radiant light flashing through my mind. "I've shared my experience because I believe it's what Jesus has called me to do. I was shown the truth, that our worth isn't found in the rules we follow, but in His grace. The Ordnung cannot save us. Only He can." A ripple of murmurs spread around the table, the elders exchanging uneasy glances. "Gabriel," another elder interjected, his tone sharp, "the Ordnung is the foundation of our faith. Without it there would be chaos. Are you suggesting we abandon it?" "No," I replied firmly. "The Ordnung has its place. It provides structure and discipline, but it was never meant to replace a relationship with Jesus. Rules are tools, not chains. They can guide us, but they cannot save us." My words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Bishop Ziegler leaned forward, his steely gaze piercing through me. "Do you understand what you're saying, Gabriel? You are challenging the very principles that hold this community together. Do you truly believe that you've been called to do this?" "Yes," I said, my voice unwavering. "I believe it with all my heart." The meeting ended in a stalemate. The elders didn't outright condemn me, but neither did they accept what I had shared. I left the council room feeling both relieved and burdened, knowing that the road ahead would be even more challenging. Over the next few weeks, the division within the community became more pronounced. Some were drawn to the message of grace, finding in it a freedom they had long yearned for but didn't know how to name. Others, however, saw it as a threat to everything they held dear. One evening, as I was returning from the fields, I found my neighbor, Caleb, waiting by the gate. He was a quiet man, younger than me by a few years, and had always been reserved in his interactions, but tonight there was a fire in his eyes, a determination I hadn't seen before. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice urgent. We sat together on the porch, the cool evening air wrapping around us. As I shared my story once more, Caleb listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. When I finished, he let out a deep sigh. "I felt it too," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "The weight of the rules, the constant striving. I've tried so hard to follow the Ordnung, but I've never felt close to God. What you're saying, it feels like the answer I've been searching for." His words filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. We prayed together that night, and as the moonlight bathed the porch in its soft glow, I felt the presence of Jesus, reassuring me that I was on the right path. But not everyone was as receptive as Caleb. The opposition grew fiercer, the whispers turning into open accusations. I was labeled a troublemaker, a heretic, and there were calls for me to be shunned. One Sunday morning, as I entered the church, the usual warmth of the congregation was replaced by cold stares and murmured disapproval. I sat in my usual spot, my heart heavy but resolute. When the pastor began his sermon, it was clear that I was the target. "There are those among us," he said, his voice stern, "who seek to sow confusion, to lead others astray with claims of visions and new revelations. We must be vigilant, brothers and sisters, and guard against such dangers. The Ordnung is our guide, our anchor in the storm. Without it, we are lost." His words cut deep, but I refused to let them silence me. As I left the church that day, I held my head high, knowing that my mission wasn't to please men, but to follow the calling Jesus had placed on my heart. Despite the rejection, I began to see the seeds of change taking root. Caleb was the first, but soon others began to approach me in secret, sharing their own struggles and doubts. We started meeting in small groups, praying together, studying scripture, and encouraging one another. It wasn't a rebellion, it was a revival. For every person who turned away, there was another who found hope. For every accusation, there was a moment of grace. And for every step I took on this uncertain path, I felt the presence of Jesus guiding me, strengthening me, and reminding me of his promise, "I am with you all." The conflict within the community continued to intensify, and with it, my own sense of isolation. While a handful of people had begun to resonate with the message of grace I shared, the majority clung tightly to the Ordnung, viewing it as the foundation of our identity and faith. It wasn't anger or hatred that drove their opposition, it was fear. Fear of change, fear of losing the traditions that had sustained our people for generations, and perhaps most deeply, fear of stepping outside the boundaries that had long defined what it meant to be close to God. For me, this tension reached its breaking point one cold afternoon in late winter. The frost clung stubbornly to the fields, and the air smelled sharp with the promise of snow. I was working outside, repairing the roof of the small tool shed near our house when my father approached. His face was set in a way I had come to dread, somber, serious, but tinged with something I couldn't quite. "Gabriel," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "we need to talk." I set down the hammer and climbed down from the ladder, brushing off my hands on my pants. "What's on your mind, Father?" He hesitated, his eyes scanning the horizon as though looking for the right words among the distant trees. "The elders have made a decision," he said finally. "They've called for a special meeting. They want to discuss your place in the community." I froze. My place in the community. I knew what that meant. The Ordnung was not just a set of rules, it was the glue that held our people together. To question it, to challenge its supremacy, was to risk being cast out, shunned. "Do they want to excommunicate me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "They haven't said that," my father replied quickly. "Not yet. But you've stirred up unrest, Gabriel. They believe your message is dangerous." "And you?" I asked, meeting his eyes. "Do you believe it's dangerous?" He didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. "I believe you mean well. I believe you think you're doing the right thing. But I also believe you're putting everything we've built at risk. The Ordnung is what holds us together, Gabriel. Without it, who are we?" I felt my heart break a little in that moment, not because of his words, but because I could see the fear behind them. My father, a man of unshakable faith and quiet strength, was terrified. Terrified of losing his son to what he saw as a dangerous path, and terrified of what my message might mean for the community he had spent his life serving. The special meeting was scheduled for the following Sunday after worship, The atmosphere in the church that morning was thick with tension, the usual hum of whispered prayers replaced by an uneasy silence. My family sat with me in our usual pew, but their presence felt more like a barrier than a comfort. I could feel their worry radiating off them, even as they tried to keep their expressions neutral. When the service ended, the congregation filed out, leaving only the elders, my family, and a handful of other members who had been directly involved in the discussions about my testimony. We gathered in the small meeting hall adjacent to the church, the air cold and damp despite the fire crackling in the corner hearth. Bishop Ziegler was the first to speak. He stood at the head of the room, his presence commanding despite his advanced age. "Gabriel," he began, his voice calm but firm, "you've been given many opportunities to explain your actions. Today we need clarity. Do you or do you not stand by the teachings of the Ordnung?" I rose slowly, every eye in the room fixed on me. My hands trembled, but I clasped them together to steady myself. "I respect the Ordnung," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I believe it provides discipline and structure, and it has its place. But no set of rules, no matter how well-intentioned, can take the place of a relationship with Jesus. It's His grace that saves us, not our works." There was a murmur of dissent, the voices overlapping like waves crashing against each other. Bishop Ziegler raised his hand, calling for silence. "You are saying, then," he pressed, "that you believe the Ordnung is unnecessary?" "No," I replied firmly. "I'm saying it's not sufficient. The Ordnung can guide us, but it cannot save us. Only Jesus can do that." My words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. For a moment no one spoke. Then an elder to my left, Elder Reuben, stood, his face flushed with anger. "You're leading people astray, Gabriel," he said, his voice trembling. "You're undermining the very foundation of our faith. Do you even understand the damage you've caused?" "I'm not trying to lead anyone astray," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I'm trying to lead them to Jesus, to grace, to freedom." Elder Reuben shook his head, his expression a mixture of frustration and sorrow. "You're blinded by pride. You think you've found some higher truth, but all you've done is sow confusion and division." The meeting lasted for hours, the arguments circling back on themselves like vultures over a wounded animal. By the time it ended, I felt drained, as though every ounce of strength had been wrung out of me. The elders had not made a decision about my fate, but the tension in the room was palpable. As I walked home that evening, the cold wind biting at my face, I found myself questioning everything. Had I made a mistake? Was I truly following Jesus, or was I, as Elder Reuben had said, blinded by pride? I stopped at the edge of the field, the moonlight casting long shadows across the snow. I knelt there, the frost seeping through my trousers, and prayed. "Lord," I whispered, my breath visible in the frigid air, "am I doing the right thing? Have I misunderstood your calling?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with a quiet assurance, a peace that settled over me like a warm. I didn't hear a voice or see a vision, but I felt the presence of Jesus as real as it had been in the void. And in that moment, I knew. This path was not meant to be easy. It was meant to be faithful. In the days that followed, I began to notice something remarkable. Though the opposition remained fierce, small moments of grace began to emerge. A widow from the community, one of the most devout followers of the Ordnung, approached me quietly after worship one Sunday. "Gabriel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've been praying about what you've shared, and I think you're right. The Ordnung has been my guide, but I've never truly felt close to God. Not the way you've described. Would you pray with me?" Tears filled my eyes as I nodded, taking her hands in mine. We prayed together in the quiet of the church, and for the first time, I saw the weight of years lift from her shoulders. Moments like these became my anchor. For every voice of dissent, there was a quiet ripple of transformation. For every door that closed, another cracked open. There's a unique kind of loneliness that comes when you stand at a crossroads, knowing the path you've chosen is the right one, but seeing the world turn its back on you. That's where I found myself in the weeks that followed the elders' special meeting. I had not been excommunicated, but the whispers had grown louder, the disapproving glances more frequent, and the weight of isolation heavier. Yet, amidst this, something extraordinary began to happen, a spark igniting in the darkness. Caleb had been the first to truly accept the message of grace, his quiet transformation spreading like ripples in a pond. He became a beacon for others who, like him, had felt the weight of striving but never found the freedom that faith promised. Slowly, more faces began appearing in our small gatherings. Miriam, a young widow with sorrow etched in her eyes; Jonathan, a farmer with calloused hands and an unyielding spirit; and Rebecca, my younger sister, who had always been the gentlest soul in our family. Each brought their own story, their own doubts, and their own hopes. Together we prayed, studied, and shared our burdens. These gatherings, though simple, were profound. For the first time, I saw the beauty of faith, not bound by rules, but nurtured by relationship. Relationship with Jesus, with each other. One evening, as the group gathered in Caleb's barn, a cold wind swept through the cracks in the wooden walls, carrying with it a sense of urgency. We sat in a circle, the faint glow of lanterns casting dancing shadows as Caleb read aloud from the Gospel of John. His voice, though steady, trembled with emotion as he came to the verse, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." As the words lingered in the air, Miriam spoke softly, her voice breaking the silence. "What does that freedom look like?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "I want to believe in it, but I don't know." I took a deep breath, the weight of her question pressing against me. "It's not something you earn," I began. "It's not found in perfect obedience or flawless faith. It's found in surrender, in trusting that His grace is enough, even when you feel like you're not." Her gaze held steady, tears glistening in the corners of her eyes. "But what if I fail?" she whispered. "What if I can't live up to it?" "You will fail," I said gently. "We all will. But His grace isn't conditional. It's not about your strength. It's about His. And when you fall, He's there to lift you up." As the words left my lips, I felt the presence of Jesus fill the room, a warmth that seemed to wrap around each of us like a comforting embrace. Miriam nodded slowly, a glimmer of hope breaking through the sorrow that had weighed her down for so long. But the spark of hope in our small group came with challenges. The wider community began to notice the changes in those who attended our gathering. Miriam's smile, once rare, became frequent, her joy almost defiant in the face of the tragedy she had endured. Caleb's quiet strength grew into boldness, his actions reflecting a newfound peace that couldn't be ignored. Even Rebecca, though still cautious, began sharing glimpses of the truth with her friends. With every sign of transformation, the whispers grew louder. The elders called another meeting, this time with members of the congregation present. It was not an official excommunication, but it felt like an inquisition. As I stood before the assembly, the weight of their disapproval was palpable. My father sat near the back, his face unreadable, while Caleb, Miriam, and a few others who had joined our gatherings stood quietly beside me. Bishop Ziegler addressed the room, his tone firm but calm. "Gabriel," he began, "your actions have caused division in this community. Your teachings challenge the Ordnung and sow confusion among our people. Do you truly believe you are following the will of..." I met his gaze, unwavering. "I do," I said simply. "I believe the Ordnung is a tool, but it is not the source of salvation. That lies in Jesus alone. His grace is sufficient. It's what sets us free." There was a murmur of dissent. the tension in the room thickening like storm clouds. An elder rose, his voice sharp. "And what of the unity of the community? What of the traditions that have sustained us for generations? Are they to be cast aside for this so-called freedom?" "No," I replied firmly. "They're not to be cast aside. But they must point us to Jesus, not replace him. Unity isn't built on rules, it's built on love, and that love comes from him." My words hung in the air, the silence that followed almost deafening. I knew I had not convinced everyone, but I could see the flicker of doubt in some of their eyes, a crack in the foundation of fear that had held them captive for so long. That evening, as I knelt in prayer, the weight of the day pressed heavily. Lord, I whispered, am I doing enough? Am I planting the seeds you've asked me to, or am I failing you? The answer came not in words, but in peace, a quiet assurance that I was not alone, that he was with me every step of the way. As I rose from my knees, I felt a renewed strength, a determination to keep pressing forward, no matter the cost. Over the next weeks, the spark in our small group grew into a flame. More people began attending, their curiosity outweighing their fear. Each brought their own questions, their own struggles, and their own yearning for something deeper than the rules that had governed their lives. Together, we began to see what faith could look like when it was rooted in grace rather than striving. But with every step forward, the opposition grew fiercer. Rumors spread, accusations were made, and the threat of shunning loomed over us like a shadow. Yet through it all, we held fast to the truth that had set us. One night, as the group gathered in Caleb's barn, I looked around at the faces illuminated by the lantern's glow. Each bore the marks of struggle, but also the light of hope. "This is just the beginning," I said, my voice steady. "The road ahead won't be easy, but we walk it together, and we walk it with him." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, their courage bolstered by the strength of the community we had built. In that moment, I knew that the mission Jesus had given me was not just about sharing the truth. It was about building a foundation of love, a foundation that would endure. As the days turned into weeks, I began to realize the magnitude of what Jesus had called me to. It wasn't just about sharing my story. It was about living it, embodying the grace I had received in every interaction, every decision, and every challenge. But the more I tried, the more I felt the weight of my humanity pressing against me. Doubt whispered in the quiet moments, asking questions I couldn't ignore. What if I am rejected by everyone I love? What if this burden is too much for me to bear? Though the small gatherings continued to grow, their success was not without consequence. Rumors circulated, whispers behind closed doors about what they labeled as deviation from the community's sacred teachings. I knew I was treading dangerous ground. Yet, with each new face in our group, each soul finding freedom in Jesus, I felt renewed, as though I were witnessing miracles unfold before my eyes. One evening, as I returned home from a prayer meeting, I found my father waiting for me by the kitchen table. The room was dimly lit, the flickering oil lamp casting long shadows against the walls. His expression was grave, his hands folded tightly, as though he were bracing himself for a storm. "Sit," he said simply. I obeyed, pulling out the chair across from him and resting my hands in my lap, waiting for him to speak. "Gabriel," he began, his voice low, "I've been patient. I've tried to understand, but I need to know, is this truly what you believe God has called you to? Turning away from the Ordnung? Challenging everything we've built as a family, as a community?" I met his gaze, the weight of his disappointment sinking into me. "Father," I said quietly, "I'm not turning away. I'm turning toward him, toward the truth he has shown me. It's not about abandoning our traditions. It's about remembering why we follow them in the first place. If they don't point us to Jesus, then what purpose do they serve?" His jaw tightened, and I could see the conflict raging inside him. "The Ordnung is what holds us together," he said firmly. "Without it, We are lost. No, I replied softly. Without him, we are lost. The Ordnung is a guide, yes, but it cannot save us. Only his grace can do that. For a moment he said nothing, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You're tearing this family apart. I don't know if I can stand by and watch it happen. His words cut deeper than I could have anticipated, and I felt the sting of tears in my eyes. I'm sorry, I said, my voice trembling. I don't want to hurt you, but I can't turn away from what he's called me to. I won't. That night, I knelt by my bed, the weight of rejection pressing down on me like a stone. Lord, I whispered, my voice breaking, I don't know how to do this. I feel so small, so inadequate. Please, give me the strength to keep going, to follow you even when it hurts. As I prayed, I felt his presence wash over me, a warmth that filled the room, wrapping around me like an embrace. I heard his words echo in my heart, my grace is sufficient for you, Gabriel. My power is made perfect in weakness. It wasn't the answer I had been hoping for. I wanted him to take the burden away, to make the path easy, but instead he reminded me that his strength would carry me, even when mine failed. The following morning, I was met with a new challenge. Caleb arrived at my door, his face pale and drawn, his expression one of fear. They're talking about shunning us, he said, his voice shaking. You, me, everyone in the group. They think we're defying the Ordnung. They think we're dangerous. My heart sank. Shunning wasn't just a punishment, it was a severing, a removal from the community, the family, the life we had known. For Caleb, it meant losing his connection to his parents, his siblings, his future. For me, it meant losing everything. They're afraid, I said, trying to reassure him, afraid of what they don't understand. But we're not alone, Caleb. Jesus is with us, and his love is stronger than their fear. Caleb nodded, though the tension in his shoulders remained. What do we do? He asked. How do we keep going? We surrender, I replied, not to their judgment, but to him. We trust that he will carry us through, no matter what happens. As the threat of shunning loomed, the group continued to meet in secret, their courage growing even as the opposition mounted. Miriam's transformation became a beacon for many, her smile and unwavering faith inspiring others to join us. Even Rebecca, though hesitant, began sharing her testimony, her quiet strength shining through in the face of resistance. One night, as we gathered in Caleb's barn, I felt the presence of Jesus fill the room more powerfully than ever before. The air was heavy with anticipation, and I knew that something was about to change. We're standing on the edge of something extraordinary, I said, my voice steady as I addressed the group. The road ahead will be difficult, but we are not alone. His grace is sufficient for us, and his love will sustain us. The group murmured their agreement, their faces illuminated by the lantern's glow. In that moment, I realized that the mission Jesus had given me wasn't just about sharing a message. It was about creating a community, a foundation of love that would endure even the harshest trials. The following week, the elders announced their decision. Caleb had been right. The shunning was to begin. Those who continued to meet with the group would be cast out, their ties to the community severed. When I stood before the assembly, I felt the weight of their judgment pressing against me. My father sat near the back, his expression unreadable, while Bishop Ziegler addressed the room. Gabriel, he said, his tone firm, you have been given countless opportunities to repent, to return to the teachings of the Ordnung, yet you persist in challenging the foundation of our faith. Do you have any final words before the decision is carried out? I took a deep breath, the presence of Jesus steadying me. I will not stop sharing the truth he has shown me, I said, my voice clear. His grace is sufficient, and his love is what sets us free. I will follow him, no matter the cost. The room was silent, the tension palpable. When the elders finally declared the shunning, I felt both the sting of loss and the peace of surrender. I had chosen him, and I would continue to choose him even in the face of rejection. When the shunning was declared, it felt like the final blow in a battle I hadn't asked to fight. The council's decision severed me from the ties that had defined my life, my community, my family, my place in the world. The church doors closed behind me that day, and I walked home with the heavy knowledge that I no longer belonged. But what I carried was more than rejection. It was peace. The peace Jesus had promised me in the radiant light of his love. The road ahead stretched into the unknown, its twists and turns shrouded in uncertainty. But one thing remained constant: him. The Jesus who had met me in the void, who had called me to speak the truth, who had assured me that I wasn't alone. His presence was as real to me now as it had been then, and though I had been cast out, I knew I had been sent out as well. The early days were the hardest. I missed my family's warm presence, my father's quiet wisdom, and the comforting rhythms of community life. The loneliness was sharp, but it was tempered by the knowledge that I was walking the path Jesus had laid before me. Caleb and Miriam were my anchors, their own transformations a testament to the power of grace. We supported each other, prayed together, and began to rebuild what had been broken. One evening, as we sat around the fire in Caleb's barn, I asked the question that had been weighing on me. "Why did you choose this?" I said, looking at them, "You could have stayed with the community, lived quietly, avoided the pain. Why did you choose to follow him?" Caleb leaned forward, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. "Because it's true," he said simply. "Because it's real. I spent my whole life striving, obeying, and never feeling close to God. And then I met him, through your story, through his grace, and it changed everything. I couldn't go back, not after that." Miriam nodded, her eyes glistening. "I lost my husband, and for a long time I thought I'd lost God too. But when you shared your story, Gabriel, it reminded me that his love doesn't depend on my circumstances. It's constant, unchanging. That's why I chose to follow him, because he chose me first." Their words filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. This was what Jesus had meant when he showed me the faces in the wheat field, the people who would hear and believe. It wasn't about numbers or success. It was about hearts changed, lives transformed. Over time, the small groups began to grow. At first, it was just Caleb, Miriam, and a handful of others who had dared to seek something deeper. But as the weeks turned into months, more people began to join us, some from the Amish community, others from outside, each carrying their own story, their own longing for truth. One day, a man named Jacob arrived at one of our gatherings. He was older, his face lined with years of labor and worry. He listened quietly as I shared my testimony, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he approached me, his eyes filled with tears. "Gabriel," he said, his voice trembling, "I've lived my whole life wondering if I was good enough, if God could ever love someone like me. But hearing you speak tonight, like I finally understand. It's not about being good enough, it's about his grace, isn't it?" I nodded, my heart swelling with joy. "It is," I said. "And that grace is yours, Jacob. You don't have to earn it. It's already been given." Jacob joined our group that night, and his presence became a blessing to us all. His wisdom and humility inspired others, and his journey of faith reminded me that transformation was possible at any stage of life. But the challenges didn't disappear. The opposition from the Amish community remained fierce, and the whispers about our group turned into outright accusations. I was called a heretic, a troublemaker, even a deceiver. Yet through it all, I held on to the promise Jesus had given me: "I am with you always." One evening, as I knelt in prayer, the weight of the rejection felt heavier than usual. "Lord," I whispered, "I need you. I feel so small, so inadequate. Please, show me the way." The answer came in the stillness, a quiet assurance that I was not alone. His presence filled the room, and his peace washed over me. I realized then that the journey wasn't about my strength or my ability. It was about His grace, His power working through my weakness. As the months turned into years, the group continued to grow, its roots spreading deeper and wider. Lives were being changed, people finding freedom in His love, relationships being healed, burdens being lifted. The spark had become a flame, and the flame was spreading. One day, as I walked through the fields, I looked up at the sky, the sun breaking through the clouds in radiant beams. I felt His presence then, as real as it had been in the void, and I remembered His words, "The seeds you plant will grow, even if you don't see the harvest." I realized that I didn't need to know the outcome of this journey. I didn't need to see the harvest or understand the full impact of my work. All I needed was to trust Him, to keep planting the seeds, to keep walking the path He had set before me. Years later, as I stood before a gathering of believers, now numbering in the dozens, I shared the story of how it all began: the accident, the void, the radiant light, the love that had set me free. I looked out at the faces before me, each one a testament to His grace, and felt the overwhelming peace of knowing I had followed Him, no matter the cost. "This journey hasn't been easy," I said, my voice steady, "but it's been worth it, not because of anything I've done, but because of what He has done. His grace is sufficient for us, and His love is what sets us free." The room was silent, the weight of the truth settling over everyone, and then, slowly, they began to sing, a hymn of praise, their voices rising in unison, a melody of hope and joy that filled the air. As I knelt in prayer that night, I thought back to the moment Jesus had called me, the vision of the wheat field and the faces of the people who would hear and believe. I realized that the mission wasn't about numbers or recognition. It was about love, His love, the love that had changed me, the love that had changed them, the love that would continue to change the world. I opened my eyes and smiled, the peace of His presence filling me once more. The journey wasn't over, but I wasn't afraid. I had met the truth, and the truth had set me free.